Today we're gonna talk about barriers to financial freedom. Have you ever desired to live a life whereby you're happy and free? So for you to live a financially free life, there are certain things that they cost us not for us to be in a position to enjoy financial freedom. I believe financial freedom is what we need. So today we're going to look what are the things that hamper us, things that hinder us for us not to be in a position to experience this financial freedom. So what are those barriers? What are the things that come into a place that upsets us, that cause us not to enjoy financial freedom? So I'm gonna list 10 things that will stop us from not experiencing financial freedom. So the first thing that I believe that will affect us, that will cause us not to enjoy financial freedom, is lack of financial literacy. I've realized many people don't understand how much money works. They don't even understand budgeting, investing, debt management, and saving for future. So as a result, we find ourselves making poor decisions, like imagine taking a high interest debt or no emergency fund, or sometimes we underutilize the investment. So these are the things that we have to be free from. So we need to educate and empower ourselves financially. Another barrier that we have to overcome is high level of debt. For example, you may take student loans, car loans, or personal loans with high interest. Do you know nowadays I don't rush in to take high loans? Do you know why? Because of the high interest. And what happens when you have got such a high levels of debt is because we find ourselves investment is not made possible. I mean, what you earn, it goes towards interest payment. Imagine, instead of wealth building, we find ourselves we are just repairing Polaro, and that's not a wise decision. Another barrier we have to be aware of is living beyond your means. I've realized when you spend more than you earn, it's often fueled by lifestyle influence or social pressures. That's what young people nowadays have, that pressure to outclass, to do this their best. So we have to we have to just live within our means, because do you know what happens when you do that? There'll be a chronic lack of savings and reliance on debt. The other barrier is lack of budget and financial planning. I think most people we have to create a structure for managing our income. We have to know where does our money goes, because if we don't do, there'll be money leak through unnoticed spending and missed opportunities. Another barrier that you have to address, inadequate emergency fund. Can I ask you, sir, do you have emergency fund? I've realized sometimes things happen, and sometimes if you don't have an emergency fund, you realize that perhaps our dreams or what we tend to do, our money goes there. So we have to set aside our finances so that when emergency comes, you're not caught unaware. So no financial buffer for unexpected expenses when we lack emergency savings, or perhaps you may lose your job, or sometimes even medical leave. In fact, this week my friend lost a job, and I was asking how in the world is that happening? And I wonder, what if he had the emergency savings? I think those are the situations that we need to address. So what happens when we don't have an emergency adequate funds? We are forced to go into debt when emergencies occur. The other barrier that we have to overcome, that we have to be free, is from fear or avoidance of invest. Let's make this clear. Not taking advantage of compound interest and long-term market growth will cost us the opportunities that we have to invest. Imagine relying only on savings, which typically don't outpace inflation. Do you realize that inflation is rising up? So we have to really live like wealthy people. I've realized there are two people who live life. We have the poor and the rich. So if we want to be wealthy, we have to adapt the mechanism. We have to learn from millionaires, from the wealthy people, because I believe wealthy people use their money in differently from the way we ordinary poor people intend to use. So we have to adapt a proper way of managing our income. We have to invest so that we may get the profit. Another barrier towards financial freedom is low or instant income. You see, sometimes when you're not earning, it's just frustrating. We're being employed, and sometimes you're just being unemployed, or sometimes there's just job instability, or sometimes you lack access to high opportunities. I remember there's one time I used to work in a particular, company. We used to spend a lot of time and hours working under that company. And sometimes we were so busy, and I realized they were paying us little. You can imagine. And then this was the lesson that I've learned of late. Just being busy, it doesn't necessarily mean you will progress. It's not an indicator of success. How many people live a busy life yet they're not productive? So I've realized that when you're not paid well, when you're unemployed, or maybe your job is not paying you well, you'll have difficulty covering basic expenses, leave alone savings and investments. So that's another thing that we have to overcome. The other thing is poor credit management, and then psychological and emotional barriers. I've realized that things like impulsive spending, money anxiety, fear of financial failure, or sometimes even living beliefs, I will never be great. No, I'm just good enough with money. I'm just broke. So we have to rid ourselves of this, I call it poverty, or rather poverty mentality, or this scarcity mentality. We have to free ourselves, and we have to break that barrier, that emotional barrier. And then the other thing that will cause us not to enjoy financial freedom is just simply external economic factors. Sometimes we have no control over inflation, the market, downtowns, healthcare costs, and housing crisis. Have you realized that the rising cost of living is just so high? And so what happens when we're being affected by economic factors is that there's just a reduction purchasing power. And sometimes if you're an entrepreneur, it's just really so hard to get that kind of a thing. So I believe these are the things that we have to do in order to overcome financial breakthrough. So this is G1. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Have a nice day.